Attention, all you fishes in the sea. I'm your host, Sam Fish. Come dive into the Fishbowl's latest podcast interview with character actor Robert LaSardo, most famous for Above the Law, Out for Justice, Drop Zone, Waterworld, Death Race, and The Mule, among many other films and TV series. Come swim on in. Robert LaSardo on the Fishbowl. Welcome.
Thanks for having me, Sam.
Absolutely. Thank you for taking the time to swim in the bowl with me. I hope the temperature is just right.
Me too.
Awesome. Well, I just have to say, I have been following your career since I was like a little kid. I was born in '88, so I grew up watching like all the action movies and everything, you appeared in, and I've been just a long time fan of those types of films. I'm also a huge horror fan, and there's quite a bit of that, you've done as well. And I have a huge long list of questions that if okay if we don't get it today, because honestly I could probably do like 3 or 4 1 hour interviews covering like your entire span. But the first question I have for you is, what got you interested in film?
Sam, honestly, at first I wasn't interested in it. I didn't understand the mechanism other than, like any other person that enjoyed, you know, watching movies and television shows when they, as a kid, that influenced my life. So it wasn't preordained unless, somebody else had, a plan for me, which sometimes I wonder about that, greater than myself, because if left to my own devices, sometimes I go down the wrong roads. I'm sure some of us can relate to that.
Yeah.
But to answer your question, I went into the military right out of high school. I went to the high school, ironically, for performing arts, which was a specialized school that, was ideally a precursor in terms of training and vocation for theater or film and television. I just couldn't connect the dots. I thought it was fun to perform. I made a very close friend, a teacher there named Anthony Apeson, who was instrumental in helping me understand the impact as an artist that I and others can make if we commit to it. And I remembered that, but I wasn't ready to embrace it as a duty, as a faith, as a career. It didn't seem even possible. It seemed is about as far away as the Earth is from Pluto. This idea of Hollywood and movies. I'm like, no, no way. So I was more at that stage of life. It was more like a lot of young men who are confused and growing up in a certain way are struggling with identity. And I think that what I realized was at that stage of life that I needed to employ discipline or I was going to ruin my life. So I enlisted in the military for 4 years and got my shit squared away, as they say. And once I got out of the military, I reconnected. Or during my stint in the military, I kept in contact with Anthony, and he insisted on reminding me that I should not lose sight of the creative side of my being. And though there was this tendency to want to live a normal, whatever that is, conventional structured life, because so much of my earlier life was not structured and unstable. I think there was this inner yearning for a family or identification with something that seemed permanent, or stable. And I traveled the world looking for it. I couldn't find it. So I, came full circle. And next thing I know, I'm studying with my acting teacher, but privately, like this refresher course to get reacquainted with the craft of acting and theater, and started auditioning for various television shows, movies. And at first, I was not thrilled at the process. It was horrifying to audition. And at that time, I was already covered in tattoos. I had already, I don't know, maybe more than 50% of my upper torso was covered in ink, and it wasn't popular or trendy back in those days. So the comment was always, Robert's very talented. We want to hire him, but we have a problem with the tattoos. It doesn't work in the world that we're making or we're building. So there was a lot of disappointment early on with the auditions and a lot of I wouldn't say rejection, just a lot of disappointment from the point of view of the playwrights. You know, I auditioned for off Broadway, I auditioned for movies, I auditioned for television, and it was always like, yeah, his talent is very visible, probably more visible than a lot of people that we see. The irony is, what's also visible is the ink, and it's creating a barrier, and we can't seem to get past it. Sorry. And so I lost a lot of opportunities, or was not allowed opportunity to participate because of my physical appearance. And I don't fault the people that made those decisions based on a visual medium that requires you look a certain way. I totally get it, you know. So I lost heart for a while the first year out of the Navy. And Anthony Apson insisted that I keep my shirt on, you metaphorically and literally,
Right,
that
right.
they would eventually write roles for me. He had this crystal ball like Merlin, and saw a future for me, that there would come a time where it would not be as big of an issue as you think, and your talent would transcend this idea of pariah, this idea of taboo, something you should not do as a thespian, and that they would find a place for me in the movie industry, and I would make a living at it. And a few months later, I went on an audition for a Warner Brothers film, and went through a series of callbacks, and was hired to be in a film with Richard Pryor called Moving, under contract. Was flown out to Los Angeles, and the reality suddenly hit me that Anthony wasn't just blowing smoke. And then I had a proclivity, an instinctive feeling that was very positive when I performed on stage. So if you ask me what got me into it, is how I felt when I was on stage performing. The rest of the world seemed to disappear, and whatever fiction or whatever literature I immersed myself in, it possessed me. And I loved living in these seemingly fictional worlds that would become the more dominant reality as you dived into character, dived into circumstance, and all of what was, basically what's required of the artist to authenticate the playwright's literature and world, so that the audience can have a real experience. And there was something about that process and that catharsis, that kind of Ouija board magic, and literally stepping in psychically into other worlds and letting it overtake what you perceive yourself to be in your everyday life, was to me like a form of magic. And it truly liberated me, man, temporarily. It seemed to lift me off the ground. And I felt that anything was possible within the frame of that realm of performing. You know, that
That's
was what really put the hook in me. It wasn't so much like, oh man, I was staring in the mirror all the time and I want to be that guy. I didn't really have an affection for the Vanity Fair as much as I felt something spiritually assisting me when I would do the work. There was something about it that was healing.
that's awesome.
Yeah.
That's very, very cool. And I mean, the industry has totally changed. I mean, look at people like Danny Trejo,
Mm.
who are covered in tattoos, and now he's Machete, and people know who he is. And I mean, it's great that the industry has allowed change to happen, but at the same time, it's some of the most memorable characters that I remember you playing were because of you having tattoos and stuff like that that allowed you to get roles like that.
Mhm.
And when I actually told my dad that I was going to be interviewing you yesterday for today, I showed him your picture on IMDb, and he was like, "Holy shit, you're interviewing that guy?" Because my dad is pretty much the guy who got me into, like, all the movies and music and stuff I'm into. He's the reason I went to school here in Pittsburgh to pursue screenwriting, and that's where I started my podcast. And it's very cool to be able to talk to you and talk about your career and a lot of your films and stuff, because I'm definitely a big, big fan.
Thank you, Sam. If you don't mind me asking, what's your father's name?
Oh, Jonathan.
Jonathan. Tell Jonathan, hey Jonathan, I appreciate that. I'm not going to assume you have an affection for me, but I appreciate that. That maybe at one point in time you might have watched something I've been in and enjoyed it, and that you passed on that fascination to your son and allowed him to become a. Sounds like you're a film historian, Sam. You get really into it. You're like me. You do the research. It's not just a trend topic for you, right? You really enjoy
Yes,
cinema,
yes.
right? And history of film. Yeah. Thank
When
you, Jonathan, for raising him that way. I appreciate it.
I'm gonna call my dad as soon as we're done with the interview. I'm gonna tell him, guess what Rob LaSardo said when you said you gotta listen to this interview when it's posted. But yes, I'm such a fan of film, and I'm such a fan of especially certain genres of film. And it's actually because of my dad letting me see Total Recall when I
Hmm.
was 5 years old. Uh, just covered my eyes on the three-titted lady, but everything else was fine. And it left an imprint on me, and I've been, a huge Arnold fan ever since then. I've been a
Yeah,
fan of just every single action movie, and it just sucks because they don't make, action movies like they did in like the 80s and 90s, like they do
I know.
today.
Agreed. Yeah, it's changed a bit.
Yeah, yeah. Now we have like Fast and the Furious and superhero movies. And not that I'm dissing Fast and the Furious, I'm invested in that franchise. I grew up with it, but I wanna see stuff like, like you were in, like, but that means it's a great segue to talk about pretty much the first movie that I really noticed you in, when that was Hard to Kill.
Yeah, Steven Seagal.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know
Yeah.
you also work with him on Out for Justice.
Yes. I got a quick little anecdote or story for you, if you don't mind.
Yeah. Yeah.
I met Steven at an audition, like many I had gone on when I was in Los Angeles at the time. And after my audition, he was very candid with me and said, I think you're a consummate actor. And he went on to say some other really favorable things. And usually, there's this almost like iron curtain, with producers and directors and stars when you go in to read. And you almost wonder whether you fumbled the ball or you scored a touchdown. You never really know how to read these individuals, based on, their body language, their criteria after the fact. Sometimes they can be very dismissive, sometimes they'll engage you, but none of it really adds up to anything until you get the call that you've got the job, right? So it's very important, I think, not to be presumptuous about what happens there, positive or negative. It's a lot of fairy dust, that could be,
Hmm.
blown into your face. But the point is this: that once he said that, I felt it was unusual, other than what my experience had been with Richard Pryor, who was also very candid with me and very personable, and was instrumental in helping me establish confidence that I did have the right to be where I was with him in this movie, despite a lot of negative input from people who did not understand the way I was manifesting with the tattoos. Like, good luck with that. But
Hmm.
the point is, when you have people like this who are living legends or movie stars complimenting you outside the circle of negativity and introduce a new way of looking at things, it kind of feels like a rebirth. And that's what it was like for me with Steven Seagal. And soon after that audition, I was hired to be in that film, Hard to Kill, with Kelly LeBrock, who's his co star. And I had also the opportunity to speak with him on set because he's very friendly with me. And he mentioned, hey, I got this film project, screenplay in development, and I want you to be in it. And he went on to explain a little bit about it, and it turned out to be Out for Justice. And a year later, I got a call from management saying that he wanted to meet with me and wanted me to meet his director. And after a brief conversation with the director and Steven, I got the call about a week or two later that I was hired again on a Warner Brothers project and under contract for a couple of months. So how often, at least my experience is that a lot of people say things in Hollywood, but it's very rare that they mean what they say. And even if they mean what they say, it doesn't always bear fruit. So you learn early on not to take the compliments or the insults too serious. You just kind of flow like the Taoists. You just kind of go where the river goes, and with good intention or with your motivation, and hope that you can make impact and someone will recognize that and hire you. My point about Steven, though, is that he kept his word. I could easily thought, oh, that's nice, man. Oh, you have a project in development. Great. Wow, cool. And been, not necessarily moved by the seeming offer, to participate in another movie, because it sounded so authentic. Just, man, I got this character I want you to play in my next movie, and it seemed like I was having a conversation not with the celebrity, or the icon, but just a man who respected me, and his wife as well. His, at the time, Kelly LeBrock, were very friendly, and they were looking at my tattoos, and they had no problem with them. We were just talking about them, so it was like a non-issue, which is very rare for me to be in a situation across from this movie star. When I had come from a world where everywhere I went, it felt like people were throwing rocks at me because of it, and the social dynamics of my life, personal, work jobs I did, I'd have to go in the back where the people wouldn't see me because the boss didn't want people to see that I had tattoos because maybe they wouldn't eat at the place. There was so much of this grime associated with the imagery that's not present in this day and age. That when I met very powerful and celebrated celebrities who were actually were quite the opposite in the way they perceived me, it was mind blowing, man. It was really mind blowing. There was no judgment. There was just
Right,
love
right.
and appreciation for my ability. And hey, I want to give you a job. Okay, wow,
That's awesome. And I
yeah.
also
So
just want to
I love
also
Stephen for that. I'll never
that's
forget him.
awesome. I also just want to say that Hard to Kill is my number one favorite Steven Seagal.
Right on. That's a good one. It's a good one. Yeah.
A lot of great stars in that. One of my also longtime favorite stars, William Sadler.
Mm.
I'm a big fan of his. He's another great character actor
Mm.
that's just been a lot of stuff. But another really awesome action film that I'm a big fan of, and they've actually been playing it on the movie channels. I'm watching it every single time it's on. Drop Zone.
Oh, wow. Wow. That wasn't just a movie, man. That was an experience for me. I got to go to Florida. It was, back in the 90s,
Right.
different world back then.
Yeah, yeah,
I
definitely.
miss it.
I
Yeah.
know, I know.
We filmed in the Florida Keys, Key West. We filmed in Miami. We filmed in Key Largo, I think. We moved a bit. There was quite a few company moves within that geography, and every one of them was, prettier than the next. It's just an amazing time. And Wesley Snipes, I've known for years. I worked with him on a film. I don't know if you remember this film with Christopher Walken and David Caruso called King of New York.
That's actually on the list that I
Yeah,
want I
and
want to
so
talk to you
yeah,
about.
and I known Wesley, and when Wesley saw that I had arrived at this party, to celebrate the movie, it wasn't a wrap party. It was prior to filming, just kind of a welcome to type thing, and event. And Wesley came right up to me. He said, "Hey, Bob," and he gave me a hug. It was really nice. I felt at home. It wasn't any of these. Sometimes I guess I've heard stories. Some movie stars they put on airs and you can't talk to them. And it was like just coming home to family. It was really nice.
That's awesome.
And John Badham, who directed Saturday Night Fever, who directed Drop Zone, he was a very nice man, and is a very nice man, and was and there's a whole slew of people that I worked with that were very pleasant and friendly. So it was a really nice experience.
That's awesome. I know you've worked with Gary Busey a couple
Yeah,
times,
Gary, sure.
and
I
also
called Gary up once after the movie just to say hi and see how he was doing, and he started talking. Then he said, "Hang on a second." He grabbed his guitar and started singing to me while we're on the phone. It's like, wow, I'm getting a song out of this too, not just the conversation and small talk. He's performing for me. It's great.
I had the chance to meet Gary once. He came to Pittsburgh Comic Con a few years ago, and it was honestly one of the coolest experiences because everybody has these stories about Gary now and everything. And when I met him, it was like an amazing experience.
Yeah.
He was such a nice guy. I when I go to these conventions, I like to hand out my business card along with like an official like fishbowl pen. And when he took the pen, it was like he was just fascinated with it,
Hmm.
and said that he would possibly do my show. I probably should follow up with him because it's been a while, but I'm a huge Gary Busey fan.
Yeah,
I,
good
I,
take. Great actor. Yeah. See
yeah,
the Buddy Holly story?
yeah, yeah,
Hmm.
yeah, and I
I have
love
no
his
words, man.
his son also. Yeah,
Yeah, brilliance.
Yeah. I mean, we could also talk about the real thing that you work with him on.
hmm Patrick Gallagher, I believe, produced that. As a friend of mine from the past, a really nice guy. He produced that film. And Ashley Lawrence, a friend of mine, was one of the leads in that. Isai Morales in that was in that film. Ironically, we went to the same high school together. He went to the high school of performing arts and studied with Anthony Apson as well. And we had this kind of friendship, this vicarious friendship over the years. Isai Morales and I. And then I got to meet Rod Steiger, the Illustrated Man, ironically. I don't even remember him playing that role in
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
book, Ray Bradbury's book, The Illustrated Man. But it was bizarre, to see him, old Hollywood, golden age of Hollywood right there on the set. And it's an event.
Right. Right.
Yeah. And yeah, so yeah, the real thing. Yeah, I remember that shooting that film. Think was the director's name James Marandino. I think what's his name, James Marandino, directed that. Forgive me if I'm getting the names wrong. I think that was the name of the director.
No worries. I'm honestly not 100% sure on that. So,
Yeah,
and you've also worked with James Russo
yeah, yeah,
a couple
yeah,
times. I'm a big fan of his as well.
yeah, yeah. I think I did my first independent film directed by Abel Ferrara called China Girl,
Right. Right.
starring David Caruso and James Russo.
Right.
Who, fast forward into the future, that I'd be working with James Russo and David Caruso on, NYPD Blue and then CSI Miami. I
Right.
gotta, I'm gonna jump ahead. I tend to do this, so I jump
No,
around. So
you're fine. You're fine.
so let's fast forward into 2000, whatever it was. I think it was 2000, maybe 11. That I was doing. They brought this character back, a character back that I was portraying called Memo Fierro on a part of this cartel named the Malanoche. And I don't know what season it was of CSI Miami. But anyway, long story short is that David and I were talking, and to the producer's amazement, because I didn't realize this, but David was apparently, I guess, I wouldn't say he was feared, but he was a very private man.
Hmm.
It seemed to be, from what I was noticing, and that he was extremely calculative and very meticulous about how he wanted to go about the episodes. I almost got the sense that he was co-directing at times and would discuss with the writer sometimes in a heated fashion about certain scenes that he wanted to adjust. So I got the sense that his presence just wasn't the star, but like that he had creative influence. And when him and I just started just small talking about the past, and he used to talk a lot about this movie Apocalypse Now, directed by Francis Ford Coppola. That's a classic, right? He
Right. Right.
was fascinated with this film, and so was I. So we'd have like these existential, philosophical conversations about the film, and he would tell me things that he thought, and I would share that. And the producers would take me aside after we'd finish the day, and they'd say, "Wow, like, how do you know David?" I go, "Well, David and I go way back. I did my first independent film with him, called China Girl, and then we worked on NYPD Blue together." And we've run into each other on the street. We've run into King of New York. So I've known David, and David has an affection for me, and I guess, and we think alike. And they were like, "Wow," because he doesn't talk to anybody. I said, "Wait a minute." Yeah, he said, "What? How did you get him to?" I said, "I'm like, why are you asking me this, man? You guys are the producers. You're telling me that you can't communicate with your own star." Yeah, I don't know if it was fear, or maybe he just didn't feel like, he, like I said, his method was maybe very specific and monastic, and he just maybe wanted to be left alone. But I guess it was not a usual occurrence to see David Caruso, the star of CSI Miami, small talking with a guest star on the show. Like, what's your deal, Robert? What, how do you know this guy that he's opening up to in a way that he would never open up to people who he's been working with for years? And I counted that as a victory for myself. I thought, wow, that must be special or something. But simply, it was just that him and I connected, man.
Right.
He liked me and I liked him, and there was no bull. It was just straight talk, man, about things we both could relate to, independent of the work that we were doing. It's nice when that happens because it doesn't happen a lot.
That's
So, but
very
yeah,
cool.
James Russo, and then I went on to work with. I did a couple of films with James Russo. China Girl. I did The Real Thing. I did this other thing. I think it was called Blood Money. They might have changed the title. And I recently was in a film that starring a gentleman named Ciro DiPaggio, The Mob King, where James Russo is in that, and I have a cameo in that film. So yeah, James and I keep running into each other indirectly. It's wild. He's been around, like he's like me. He's done many combat tours in the industry of shows. He once said to me, because we sometimes we would hang out in the early days in the '90s, and he was really a skillful baseball player. And one of the things he noticed about me while he was hitting these monstrous home run balls that I pitched to him was my endurance to run after the ball and catch. He said, "Man, you've got endurance." And so I took that as a compliment in terms of that. What he meant was that as long as you have the endurance to deal with what's going to go, what basically is in front of you in terms of career, you're going to do fine. And so I understood what he was saying, kind of metaphorically as well, because he had made comments to me along those lines. And I appreciate it because a lot of times some of these guys are not nice, so it's always surprising to me when someone offers a compliment that, aside from, their own, ego trip. So that was pretty cool.
That's awesome. That's very
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah.
He seems like a really nice guy. He's another guy I've been trying to get on my show. I could, talk for hours about stuff he's been in.
Yeah, he's worked with he's worked with a lot of people. I'm sure he has a lot of stories to tell. The question is how many does he want to tell? But because it's not always it's not all roses, right? Is it?
Right,
People
right.
don't want to hear. Some people want to hear the dirt, and some people want to talk the glory. I like to do a little bit of both myself. But yeah, James has worked with a lot of people. He told me things, shared information with me about certain stars that he worked with, and it was mind-boggling. Some of the stories that he shared with me and some of his experiences and how close he got to that circle of power and what he witnessed. I'll just leave it
Very
there.
interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah.
Another film that I'm a big fan of, and you know, and I really think Jim Carrey quoted it the best in The Cable Guy, and that was Waterworld.
Hmm.
Uh, I know Waterworld didn't get like well received at the time it came out, but for me, and I think a lot of other people that were like my age at the time, we loved it. And despite what the critics may have said about it, it's a fun action. It's like Mad Max with water, you know?
Yeah, yeah. I don't put a lot of stock in a certain percentage of the critics because I've watched films that I've enjoyed thoroughly, and then referenced the Rotten Tomatoes, and I asked myself, did you see the same movie that I?
Oh, I know,
Well,
I
doesn't
know.
make sense. And then they praise something, they praise the glory of something, and I'll watch it, and I don't connect with it. It's like trying to tell somebody what kind of music they like, or
Exactly,
what
exactly.
it's a really slippery slope. It's not a I don't know if the science of cinema clearly is there, but I think there's other aspects and elements that make films work that don't necessarily abide by the physics of cinema science that have to do with the character study or the soul power of the film or the writing or the disposition of character that communicates an emotion or an archetype that people can identify with and touches them in their heart. I think the analytics of criticism with a lot of these people who observe movies from that point of view is very intellectual, and it seems to divorce itself from the heart of the matter. And some movies are driven purely by the, the heart itself rather than all the technical flaws that people so willingly want to find and dismiss the emotional content. And I think emotional content, if it's communicated authentically, can change people's lives. I know it has for me when I watched movies, and afterwards I was like, the movie stayed with me my whole life, or for months afterwards. I was still there because it touched me. And I didn't have time to look at the flaws because I was so enamored or pulled into the experience of character relationships and the story that I didn't care about that stuff. And I think most critics, they tend to divorce, not all of them, but some, it seems a pattern. They divorce themselves emotionally and look at it like it's some kind of physics project, and I think it's dangerous when you reduce art to mathematics, man. Got to
I
be. I
agree.
think there's a place for it, but sometimes they go a little overboard with that.
I
And you
completely
got
agree. Because I mean, especially like I mean, you could tell things were kind of shifting when that movie came out because like in the 80s and even before that, 70s, all cinema before that, like you could make like a concept and have it kind of be totally out of the box, and it could be sci-fi, fantasy, action, or horror, whatever. And now it's like you kind of have to have films that are almost, I mean, at least mainstream, that are more on, I guess, like a realistic base platform, even if they are, in the realm of sci-fi or fantasy, or something. You can't like make a movie that, because people criticize plot holes and stuff now way more than I feel like they did back in our, like when I was growing up, and back in the 80s and 90s, people were more just entertained with going to see, a movie, and now people, it's, you have, the internet has almost made it impossible to kind of like get away without seeing, someone talking bad about something, when the movie could have been great, or or it may not, but like you said, and before,
well,
it's all subjective.
yeah, and that brings me to a more personal point. I mean, if I were to rely on the perceptions of some of the people that I met throughout my earlier life and their evaluation of me on a personal level, creative level, whatever the evaluation was, and their checklist, and believed in that stuff, I might not be alive right now. And I'm not trying to be melodramatic or anything, but I think that it's dangerous when you allow other people's opinions to influence the way you move through life, how you experience it, and the perception of this idea of self. And it's the same thing with film. You make a film or you collaborate with others to make a film, and it's like building a house, and you try to build it the best way you know how, and so people can live in it and it can hold the weight of the responsibility of what it needs to hold. And you look at each other ideally and hold hands or shake each other's hands, say, hey, man, we built this. And whether the people that look at it objectively and say, I don't like that kind of house, who cares? I mean, there's going to be people who like it. There's going to be people that don't like it. There's going to be people who don't want to burn it down. I think it speaks more to the observer than the house itself. And that's my meaning that the audience, what you're saying about audiences today, I don't know what the issue is. I have some theories, but I won't go into it too much. But I just feel like it's more reflective of the audience than it is the cinema.
Yeah.
I
Yes.
still witness brilliance in films that are mind blowing, and I read the reviews, and I'm like, wow. And I've known a couple of critics, and what I noticed about some of them was that their personal lives didn't seem very fulfilled. And I think when you lean too heavy on the art form to fill in the gaps of your life, and you condemn it because it doesn't necessarily bring you into a state of nirvana, or blow your mind to the degree in which you want it to, because you've gotten so used to watching film after film that it becomes redundant. There's this, I think, maybe unconscious temptation to confuse your own personal life or whatever dissatisfaction you're experiencing and place that responsibility on the film. And that's not reasonable. And I remember talking to some people I knew that were critics who would ask me, "What did you think about that?" And I would explain how I felt about the film experience. And like, really, that's what you got from that? And I go, I didn't even understand half of the movie, so I would explain it to them, thinking how scary it is that this person has the power to critique this film and doesn't even understand the material, but yet I completely got it. I'm not saying I
Right.
was smarter than this individual, but some people give a lot of credibility to these people, some of these individuals who've been anointed to observe, evaluate, and judge whether or not the film bears the required, the required specifications of merit based on a program. But I wonder sometimes if the people that are setting up that checklist are reasonable in how they observe and judge things. I wonder about that. And because I've seen evidence personally that they're not always looking at things with both eyes open, or they don't even understand what they're watching. And so if they don't understand it and they can't decipher the subtext or the deeper meaning, the esoteric meaning of the film, rather than ask for help to understand what they've witnessed, they discount it as oh, it's incoherent filmmaking. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense to you. But just because you don't necessarily understand the lyric of a Jimi Hendrix song or a riff that's played by some really far out guitar player, it doesn't mean that it doesn't communicate its own genius, you know? So I think there's limitations in terms of the observer looking at various genres of cinema and their ability to recognize in a balanced way both what works in a film and what doesn't. I still think ultimately should come away with that they were entertained by it somehow. You know, was there anything that you liked about it? Is what I always ask. Clearly, there's evidence in film history where the filmmakers were negligent and didn't care about the material, and it was an exploitation piece, and clearly that will be dealt with accordingly. But when you have films that you can tell there's a lot of work went into them, and the performances are really just inspiring, and some person comes along and just glosses over it like an inconsequential variable, like it has no meaning, and focuses on one point or a couple of points in the film that did not work based on their criteria, they ignore everything else. Some of them do. Some of them are well balanced in their observation. They say, well, I like this, and the A, B, C, and D, but this was confusing to me. But you know what? You watch it. If you like this, and this, you probably will enjoy this. I think you can evaluate films in a reasonable way. I think the problem now is that there's so many opportunities, like you said, with the internet, to be a self-proclaimed critic. I wonder sometimes how legitimate these people are in their
Right.
ability to observe things in a reasonable and correct, not correct, a reasonable and merciful way, man.
Right.
You know,
Right.
are they using the station for their own grandiosities, you know, to be grandiose so they can rip something apart because it makes them feel empowered, you know, or are they actually pointing out something that a lot of people agree, yeah, this was a substandard product because it's not a not watchable movie, and all would agree, or a lot of people would agree. But like I said, I think the problem is that really quality films suffer under this tyranny of extreme judgment, man. And I don't
Yeah.
know, I don't understand where that's come from. Like I said, I have some theories about where I think it has a lot to do with people in their personal lives not feeling fulfilled, and they project that onto the movie, or maybe they are frustrated in their own lives because they may have wanted to. They had some creative dream that was never fully realized, and they use their platform to blame, you know, unconsciously or consciously, filmmakers for something that has nothing to do with the film itself, but because they were not able to either participate, produce, act, write, whatever. They're kind of, you know, spewing a lot of their own personal disappointments and using the film. It's like, you know, it's a kind of a form of abuse. Like, well, this biological father abused his son, so the son is now passing on the same abuse, you know, without recognizing that it's, you know, you're abusing your station, and you're abusing the art form because you feel left out, you feel that you were not treated fairly, and so now you're going to take that frustration and revenge out on filmmakers and people that have nothing to do with any of that, you know. And I think there's a lot of misdirection in that sense, where people are projecting their frustrations about their own careers onto actors, writers, directors, and producers because they're simply not being invited into the project, and so they damn it to hell, so to speak. And I think there is a percentage of that. No one, I doubt very few people would admit that. They may not even be conscious of it, but it's
Mm.
a very competitive field, and competition by its very nature doesn't always create a kumbaya moment. You know, it creates
Right.
envy, and envy sometimes can get quite ugly in the way it uses its cleverness to seemingly, you know, this object to employ this objective reasoning as it rips something apart, and it's not being objective at all. It's just using the intelligence in a way to deconstruct and tear things down and basically remove the inspiration that the spirit of of collaboration that the people came together for in the first place, because the critic feels uninspired and they draw inspiration by tearing things down. It's like this almost like pyromaniac kind of psyche, like, wow, I love to watch it burn. But to build requires so much work and efforts, and you have to take risks when you build. You got to really put yourself out there. And I think that portion gets forgotten when things are judged and observed. And I think sometimes can be a cowardly way to evaluate things if you don't evaluate them with balance. I'm not saying you have to, approach every film like it's a masterpiece. I'm just saying, if you're saying to me, Robert, I noticed that things have changed over the years, and the judgments are severe in terms of observation of cinema, and the critiques and the critics are just basically gaslighting every 5 minutes. Then what does that say? Are all the films really that bad, or are people's lives? Is it more of a reflection of people's lives? I mean, it's rhetorical. I don't know the answer, but
Right,
I
right.
cannot believe, based on being a consumer, because I am a film consumer. I watch a lot of movies, and I'm not going to play party to this idea that cinema is collapsing, that we're in the dark ages, that there's no light, there's no hope, it's all crap. I don't believe that, because just when I start to think along those lines, I'll watch a movie and I go, wow, it may not be a mainstream film, maybe it's a moderate budget. Who knows what classification it's measured and based on banking, but I don't care about that. I look at it and I go, wow, man, that was really good. It really affected me. Wow, time well spent. And I think to myself, why would people be so critical to divorce themselves from an opportunity of escapism where they can feel better about their day-to-day life? Because I think a lot of people utilize movies for that way, because maybe their
Right.
lives are not that exciting, or maybe they're having a problem with their personal life, and we escape into fantasy to try to remedy this stink of reality sometimes, and it helps us, like a shot, a whiskey, or whatever. And so in that sense, why would you condemn or damn the very thing that is basically helping you escape from your day-to-day life and the humdrumness? I don't understand that. I don't get that part. Never have.
I'm honestly kind of baffled by it too, because I mean, I went to school for the movies. I'm about the movies. My passion is movies.
Yeah.
Same with music. I interview a lot of musicians as well. I'm a big rock and roll guy.
Yeah.
Uh,
Right on.
you know, Hendrix is my
Yeah.
number one from
Amen. Oh, right on.
that
You
classic
got good
rock
taste.
era. I think him with Band of Gypsies was the best. Big classic rock fan, all thanks to my dad. I've seen a few, the ones that I wanted to see from that era that are still around. My first concert was Roger Daltrey open for Eric Clapton. And that was a good show. I've seen big Alice Cooper fan.
Right
Um,
on.
I've seen him like 10 times.
No more than Mr. Nice Guy.
Yeah. And on the topic of rock and roll, I had the chance to meet Meatloaf
Oh, wow.
before he
That,
before he
yeah,
passed.
oh, that album changed my life, man.
Yeah,
I
and
lost
I was
track of
like,
how many times I listened to Bat Out of Hell, man.
right. He was a super nice guy in
Right
person.
on.
Really, just I mean, when he came to Pittsburgh's Comic Con last year, and I waited in like, it must have been like a 3.5 hour line
Yeah.
to get up to him. And the reason that it took so long was because he was literally taking like at least like 5 or 10 minutes to talk with every single person who came to meet him, get a picture, get an autograph, or whatever. And just I have nothing but good things to say about Meatloaf, and may he rest in peace in rock and roll heaven.
Amen.
Yeah.
Certainly speaks to his humanity that he engaged the people that way.
Definitely, definitely. And he was supposed to come back to like the following April to do another show, and unfortunately, he passed. But
Yeah, we're all just passing through, right, Sam?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But let's get back to you here. There's no way we're gonna get to everything on the list here, but there's a couple more film like ones I did want to talk about. One that was pretty cool that I'm a big fan of because, like I said, Mad Max is a big inspiration for me, and that's Death Race.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. That was also not just a movie, but an experience, on camera and off camera. I'd never been to Montreal before. That's where we filmed it in Canada, Montreal. I was staying at a hotel in a place called Old Port, which is just this historically beautiful place with masonry and buildings that were built hundreds of years ago. It was just like living in a museum. It was amazing. Just the setting where they had us housed was beautiful. And I was there for 3 months. So I got the full tour.
Awesome, awesome. That movie is wild. I mean, the all the stuff with the cars and the
Yeah.
weaponized, vehicles and stuff. I have to just say this for a sec because that movie was a major inspiration on a script that I'm currently working. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the name Patrick Kilpatrick.
Yeah, yeah, sure. I met
Uh,
that.
I'm currently working with him to try and get one of my scripts made into a feature film, and it involves a lot of like hot rods and like Mad Max type, road rage type mayhem.
Yeah.
And I just have to say that, along with Mad Max, the Death Race movies were a major. I was watching Death Race a lot when I was writing the script. So I just want to say that that movie is awesome.
Well, I'm glad it affected you. I'm still kicking myself for not going to the premiere or to the theatrical release. I was afraid actually to go watch it on the big screen. You think I'd be run to the theater to see something, is that provided an opportunity for that kind of visibility and something that was, not just it wasn't just a movie, man. It was thrill ride is an event, right? So
Right,
it's like
right.
not going to your own graduation. I don't know what it was. I have some ideas, but on a more positive note, though, I remember when I finally did muster up the courage to watch it by myself alone. I was blown away by it, and then I was really upset that I never got to see it on the big screen. Um, but when I did, because I it's ambiguous sometimes the way they work out the deals with agents and producers and stuff. So I didn't know how the presentation of my character would play. I mean, I was in Canada when I was contacted by the studio to do ADR, the sound replacement for certain scenes in the movie, and I got a little bit of a preview of its potential, and I was like, my jaw dropped. I could not believe what I was watching. I was like, wow, I didn't realize the magnitude of this thing, and how visible they I planned on making my character because I had been experienced some disappointments throughout the years, and I learned not to get my hopes up, because the gravity shift is too much, so you go in expecting, okay, they're going to cut most of my scenes, and they probably won't even do the billing correctly, and they did everything right. They gave me main title billing, single card. They championed the glory of this character Grim, and the car sequences were mesmerizing. Everything was there, and so even with this preview of doing the ADR and seeing like, wow, this is going to be something else, I was still, afraid to see it in the theaters. But I'm glad. Did you see it when it came out in the movie theaters?
I
Or
did. I
yeah,
did.
cool. I'm glad you
Yeah.
got to see it in the theaters. Right
Yeah,
on.
I was very when I saw the
Yeah,
trailer for it. Well, first of all, I of course know about like Death Race 2000.
yeah,
You know, the
yeah.
the 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 the,
Carradine.
the,
Yeah,
the Roger Corman.
yeah. Was that Stallone and Carradine?
Yes, Stallone and
Yeah,
Carradine. Yeah,
yeah.
So I was familiar with like the, I guess would be like grindhouse type version of it,
Yeah.
the original one. And then when I saw Paul W.S. Anderson
Mm.
got his hands on that material, first of all, I've been a fan. Like he blew me away with Mortal Kombat,
Mm.
and like I grew up in that era, where like, Mortal Kombat as like a little kid, when you're growing up with like Sega Genesis and Super Nintendo and all that, and like Mortal Kombat was like my game. And
Yeah.
and when I saw that, they were doing a movie of it, and then, my dad took me to see that in theaters one summer night, after school or something, and it was I remember exactly where we saw it. I remember exactly where I saw the second one. I know who we saw it with, which theater, and I've been a huge fan of anything he does, whether it's like, video game adaptation or anything. Because another movie that had Gary Busey in it that he directed that I'm a big fan of is Soldier with
Mm.
Kurt Russell and Jason Scott Lee. That's one of my favorite sci-fi flicks, and I happen to think that Event Horizon
Yeah. Yeah.
is like his top, like one of his best films.
Yeah. Yeah. That to me is a film that is multi-layered.
Yeah,
It's not just the sci-fi, variable. There's other things going on
right.
and the subtext of what they're communicating that's really profound. You just gotta,
Exactly.
dig deep in your observations. I think that film requires more from its audience than some of the other movies. You know.
I definitely agree, and I'm kind of upset that the studio doesn't they don't want to pay basically to find like to get like the lost footage that would have they all got cut because it was like too graphic,
Yeah.
whatever, with like
Well,
the hell sequences or whatever.
yeah. It's ironic given the kind of world we live in.
Right, right,
They want to censor that aspect of things, but yet, they send my brothers off to the Middle East to fight. But, and I'm not knocking the war. I'm a veteran. I'm
right,
just saying it's ironic to me some of the censorship that goes on. And I think when you made a point earlier about how things have changed since the 90s, I think it was Ellen Burstyn in an interview. She said that something trying to I can't quote it, but I think which was what I got from her comment about her observation in terms of what was happening was that the creative element was being siphoned out and it was less influential in the decision process of making movies and the motivation behind making them, and it was turning more into a mathematical equation, like it lived in a bank somewhere,
right,
rather than the two working together. They were trying to remove the creative voice, the people that sat at the table that wanted to take risks and do things. The money people would say, nah, nah, nah. And so I think over time, what's maybe happened is that influence of the money influence, the banking influence, and this preoccupation with how much did it make this weekend? I don't. People used to talk like that around me, and I would just leave the conversation and walk away. And they're, what's wrong, Robert? I go, I'm not a banker, man. I don't. You guys are tallying up movie scores and numbers and stuff like you work for Paramount. You're in the accounting department. You guys are just filmmakers trying to put together your own independent film, yet you're talking like the man.
right,
You sound like a TV commercial, brother. It scares me. I can't relate to none of that. The people that you're evaluating, the movies you're evaluating, that same evaluation, like that saying, judge not, you know what I mean, lest ye be judged with. So it's kind of like I saw how critical some of these young men were with things that they watched and they would measure it based on commerce. And yet they tried to get a movie off the ground and couldn't understand and would go through hell trying to raise finance to put something together, and which is respected. I respect any independent filmmaker, anyone who's trying to build something from the ground up and doesn't have a whole lot of money, but just is spirited enough to get the right people involved to produce the thing, like you're doing, like a lot of people I know have done. And so when people have conversations like this and they talk about the corporation like they're in it, or they sound like they're a part of it, it frightens me because to me, some of those guys in those positions are your enemy, man. They're not going to sanction your film or even look at it or care when it comes to distribution about placing it in a proper platform because their bottom line is the very thing you guys are discussing, money. And last time I looked, I thought you guys were artists. I'm not saying you should be naive in terms of the physics of math and all that. I'm not saying be just an artist and not understand the business side, but you're evaluating things based on numbers rather than how the entertainment itself is affecting your heart and your spirit or inspiring. You guys don't sound like creators. You sound like you work in a bank for a big corporation and you
Right.
guys barely can rub a few nickels together to get your own movie made. I mean, you hypocrites much. So I can't participate too much in that kind of that diatribe or that dialogue because it reeks of envy. It reeks of inadequacy, all kinds of things, man. And I didn't get into it for that. And so my point is, when Ellen Burstyn made that comment about it changing, when someone of that caliber and that station of movie star, who's been around for years, man, you're talking about the Last Picture Show,
Right. Right.
The Exorcist, great films. She's been in, Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore, Martin Scorsese, Harvey Keitel. She's been in some amazing movies. She's a great and consummate actress. I saw her teach at the Actors Studio because I was part of the Working Observer program there. Brilliant actress, good, brilliant actor, right? And so when you hear people like this talking along those lines about how the industry is changing, and it's like it's not paranoia anymore; it's just awareness to the changing of the guard and what the priority is, man. And so I don't think it's into any surprise. Your observation about it's weird now how they go about doing things and what's their motivation behind making these things, and do they really care, or are they just trying to churn and burn and flip something over that's old and seem to make it new by those who don't know the history of film so they can sell something to the public as if it's original when in fact it's just a carbon copy of and a carbon copy of something that was by far superior because the people who made it loved it. They weren't in love
Exactly.
with the money, they were in love with what they were building. If they could make money, great. I think you can balance both. To be driven by, to lean too much on either pole, I think is dangerous. I think there's a way to kind of, find equanimity within both of those. And I think sometimes that gets lost when greed enters the room. And a lot of the time, greed enters the room.
I definitely agree.
Yeah.
I definitely agree. And so much on that subject, it's like when you have all these mergers and stuff, like Disney buying, you know, Marvel and Star Wars and 20th Century Fox, and then you have, like just, corporate merging that sometimes, like you said, creativity kind of gets lost. And are they trying to, like, McDonald's manually manufacture something that's, based on profits versus or artistic originality? And I think in a lot of mainstream movies that, I mean, it seems to me that is the case, but yet you still have a lot of, like, mainstream stuff that maybe doesn't get the attention that something like, Star Wars or Indiana Jones #5, is going to get. But it could be like more of, an indie film or something, with a smaller budget, a horror film that could have, you know had something new, an idea that hadn't been done before. But I agree with you. There is still a lot of great stuff out there and coming out. I just
I live
it's
for it, man.
Yeah,
Sam, I live for it. So I'm not
right.
going to damn it to hell, man, or be over judgmental. Why should I? If a movie entertains me and takes me out of my head for an hour and a half or however long, hey, mission accomplished. Thank you, filmmakers,
Exactly.
actors, everyone involved. Thank you so much.
Exactly.
Right? I mean, it's not that complicated. It's not. I don't.
Right.
I don't understand the hate part or the criticisms, the endless criticisms.
Right. Right.
And I try not to give attention to that stuff. I just look the other way. I don't, there's nothing productive in that.
So do I. So do I. I mean, I don't listen. I've never listened to the critics. I need to see if I need to see the film for myself. If it looked like something that I wanted to check out, that
Yeah,
means I need to see it for myself and make my own judgment. And I think, a lot of people need to do that with, life in general and movies and just not just with movies, they need to just make their own assessment on, day-to-day life, or whatever.
agreed.
What's up, all my fishes in the sea? Thanks for tuning in to my interview with Robert LaSardo and for being a subscriber. You can tune in next Saturday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time for our conclusion interview with Robert. There's a lot of cool stuff we still have in the chat, and you're definitely not going to want to miss that. You can also subscribe for early access on my Buzzsprout website. I am also accepting donations on there from all you kind, generous guppies in the sea. I'm also selling custom merch now, t-shirts, mugs, pens, all the coolest stuff to make you look like the flyest fish in the sea. You can DM me directly, Instagram at the Fishbowl88, Facebook just the Fishbowl, or directly friend request me on Facebook at Sam Fish. Thank you for your continued support, and if you like that, I got a lot of cool stuff in the works this year, so stay hooked on the Fishbowl. And as always, please subscribe.